Hi, it's Lauren Taylor Made for Scrapbook.com, and I'm so excited to share with you this floral card using a combination of Scrapbook.com exclusive products and Lawn Fawn. I'm going to be using the Elephant Parade Lawn Fawn stamp as well as the big Scripty Words hot foil plates and coordinating dies. I have my Warms and Floral A2 cardstock packs, Botanical Sprigs stencil, Sunny Lane Florals die set, and the Inline Alpha and Numbers stamp set and coordinating dies. So we're going to get started with stamping and coloring those two adorable elephants hugging each other from the Elephant Parade stamp set, again by Lawn Fawn. I'm stamping on some watercolor cardstock and I will be doing embossing. So I used an embossing tool to add some anti-static powder, and I'm stamping in my Black Misty using my Stampendable tool in Onyx Black VersaFine ink, and that will allow me to do some embossing with some clear embossing powder. I'm just using a little coffee filter to catch my embossing powder, and I'm warming up my heat gun as I put it back inside of the container. I'm going to go ahead and use my heated tool to melt that embossing powder down so it creates a nice, pretty solid black line for my image. And because it's embossed, it's raised and it will be a little bit easier for me to watercolor. I'm getting out my mat here so I can make sure my paper won't budge, and then also gives me some area to use my watercolors and not get my desk too messy. I'm using the Distress watercolor pencils from Holtz and Ranger, and I'm going to zoom in here so you can see my coloring. I'm just using a brush water pen and a little towel to wipe off excess water and color, and I'm going to be using a gray color to color in my elephant. So this is Hickory Smoke. I do have all three sets of the Distress watercolor pencils, and I went ahead and put them in color order rather than by set order. So, use what you have. If you have different watercolor pencils at home or you don't have all three sets from Holtz and Ranger, that's okay. You can color in maybe with alcohol markers instead of doing embossing and watercolor. Definitely just use what you have for coloring in your favorite medium. So I'm going around and coloring my elephants in again with Hickory Smoke from the Distress watercolor pencils, and I'm adding in color with my water brush pen. I try not to squeeze the pen very much. I only squeeze it when I want to get some water onto the pencil, and I try not to squeeze too much when I'm actually coloring in my image, so that way it's not oversaturated with water. It has more color, and that's a large reason why I like to use watercolor cardstock such as the Distress watercolor cardstock. It allows me to definitely torture the paper with water and color without ruining my image. Once I'm done with the gray, I'm going in with Kitsch Flamingo to color in the ears of my elephant, and I'm also going to do a little bit of picked raspberry just to darken some parts of the ears. If I do get too much water where I want more color, I just use my little towel to pick up the water, and it actually picks up some of the color. So if you make a mistake in watercoloring before that water dries, you could just use a towel to pick it up. It may leave a faint bit of the color behind, but better than, it drying and you being sad that you got color where you didn't want it. Now I'm moving into the greens to color in the leaves of my flower crown, yellow for the center, and then back to that picked raspberry to color in the flowers. Once those are all done, I'm going to add in some vintage photo. I just wanted to create a little bit more of a vintage look to my images here. This step is completely optional. It doesn't show up a ton, but it does add a little bit of kind of splatter and speckled look to my images. So I set that aside to dry while I work on my background. I have a sheet of this light green cardstock from the Floral A2 pack and the Botanical Sprig 6x8 stencil, and I'm going to be doing two different colors through the stencil. So I'm starting with Mode Lawn Distress Oxide, and I'm using my Dome Foam blenders to put that color in through the sprig details of the stencil. Here you can see that first stencil reveal. It's not perfect, but that's okay because a lot of it will be covered. I just wanted to create a fun background with lots of texture and the look of leaves, as I will not be doing any die cutting of leaves for my floral card here. It's going to be relying on this pretty design to add in the leaves. So I did the next color of Rustic Wilderness. I just flipped my stencil 180 degrees and kind of off-centered it so they didn't line up perfectly. I wanted there to be kind of a look of fallen leaves. And then I went around the edges of my cardstock with Mowed Lawn to add a little bit of distress to the edges, and then adding water to some Rustic Wilderness, picking it up with a paintbrush and adding splatter to my background. So creating a nice, pretty busy, leafy background. I'll set that aside to dry, and then we're going to move on to the next step. I'm going to be doing lots of die cutting with the Sunny Florals using the Floral and Warms A2 paper pack. Here's a little peek of how I was doing my die cutting with my Big Shot switch and my super large magic mat that I love. And I'm going to zoom in here so you can see how I assemble one of the flowers. I'm starting with the largest flower, and then I have a centerpiece, and then I usually add in a third piece to be the yellow kind of pollen center of my flower. Some of the smaller flowers just have 2 layers. I just like to look at the back of my die set and see some suggested ways to layer the flowers together, and I just followed along and put my 3 layers or 2 together. Here you can see all of my flowers all put together. I'm going to add a little bit more of that vintage photo, but this time for my distress ink pad, I sprayed it on my mat and added some water, and I'm just splattering it onto my flowers. I didn't want it to dry super dark, so I'm going to grab my towel and just kind of dab up some of that water and ink from my flowers. I just wanted that vintage look, very similar to how I did my stamped and colored image as well. Once that's done, I'm going to bring out some gold watercolor and splatter on this champagne gold color as well. I'll go ahead and move my flowers off to the side to dry, and I'll clean up my mess here, and we'll move on to hot foiling. I'm using the big Scripty Words hot foil plates from a recent release from Fawn, and I have the Spellbinders Glimmer system. Now it is off on a different desk, so I won't be able to show how I am using it, but I will bring over my Spellbinders Platinum machine so you can see me run it through my die cutting machine. I'm using the foil blade here on the self-healing mat and guide to cut my gold foil down, and here you can see I have my Spellbinders Scrapbook.com machine. I have my white cardstock and the gold foil, and I'm just using some Spellbinders tape to make sure that foil stays right where I want it on the white cardstock. So I have the shiny side facing up on the white cardstock, and then I put it on my hot glimmer machine when it was ready, and I'm going to run it through my die cutting machine 2 times. And I'm going pretty slow. I do speed up my videos, otherwise we would be here for an hour and I don't want to keep you too long, but I think it turned out perfect. I love that gold shine, and I actually did all of the sentiments from this set. That way I would already have them ready to go and can die cut or fussy cut them out depending on how I want to use them on a future project. I have the Love Ya die from the coordinating die set, and I'm using some mint tape to keep that die in place, making sure not to overlap any of that tape on the foil of my other sentiments because I don't want to ruin those sentiments by the mint tape accidentally picking up that foil. I'm running it through my die cutting machine, and again just going to use that Love Ya, and I'll save the rest of those sentiments for future projects. I love the gold foil, and I love having coordinating dies to cut these sentiments out. I also die cut 2 more Love Yas out of some extra pink cardstock from cutting all my florals, so that way I can create a sturdier sentiment. There is a coordinating die set for this set, and of course I don't have it, so I'm just going to fussy cut it out. I tend to usually buy dies when they have something a little extra special to them, where just fussy cutting out or using a scan and cut is not feasible. So for this set, I just went ahead and fussy cut out my images. I also took a white gel pen and added some highlights, and I also used a Colorista pink alcohol marker just to add in some cheeks and then little white dots on those cheeks as well. So now I'm going to rearrange or arrange my flowers onto my background in a way that I think will look nice. I'm trying not to put the same color flowers right next to each other, but create a nice little bouquet on my background and leaving room for those leaves around the edges so you could still see the leaves that I used the Botanical Sprig stencil with. I'm gluing the little flower crown to the top of my little mama elephant here, and it will be kind of the center but more towards the top when I put together this card. I'm going to use my glue to put my layers of the Luvia together, so just adding some of that craft glue in between the two pink layers, and then on top of those two pink layers I'm going to add my hot foiled Luvia sentiment. I'm using my reversible tweezers just to help keep that in place while adding the glue because I already get way too much ink and glue on my fingers. Having those tweezers definitely helps a lot with making sure I get glue where I want it and not all over my hands. So now I want to make this a Mother's Day card, so I'm grabbing the M and the O from the Inline Alpha and Numbers clear stamp set, and I'm going to stamp it on the same watercolor cardstock that I did with my little elephants there, so that way there's a little bit of consistency in the type of cardstock and kind of the off-white color that it has. I'm using my Misty again because I'm going to be using some ink from Lawn Fawn. I'm going to use cilantro. You can find this in the Farmer's Market ink pad set. I like having the small little inks because I already have too many inks, so having the small cubes helps keep my stash not so, overwhelming of ink. And I use my Misty because sometimes photopolymer stamps you might need to stamp a couple times with certain types of inks, and the Misty just helps make sure I can line them up perfectly every time. I'm using my smaller Magic Mat and my Big Shot switch to cut those out using the coordinating dies. So here is what my card is going to look like pretty much, but we'll start gluing everything down. So I know I can create a little bit of space where my elephant is going to be, so I'm going to glue those flowers down, leaving a little bit of a gap where my little elephants will be because I don't want to hide any flowers underneath them. I want them to be showing around my image and my sentiment. So using that craft glue again, I'm just picking up flowers, adding some glue to the back side, and then gluing that onto my stenciled green background. Again, creating a nice little bouquet of flowers. I think florals are so pretty for this time of year. It's spring, Mother's Day for this card, and I just really like using the coordinating colors from the different paper pads to create flowers. So definitely some great pink and kind of peachy orange flowers to match this kind of bright and fun green color in the background. Once all the flowers are glued down, I'm going to grab some foam adhesive. I absolutely love using the 2-inch roll. It's my go-to adhesive, besides the 1/8 strips. Love those as well. But I'm able to trim down the 2-inch roll to exactly the size I need to fit behind images. I'm using my grid mat here, and sorry, my hair is showing a little, but I wanted to make sure my elephants were centered and a little bit towards the top of the card because I need plenty of room for my sentiment. Next, I'm going to pop up the word mom. I'm going to use my Luvia just as a guide of where I need to glue it down. And I'm starting with the O since it's going to be in the center of the word mom. And then repeat by adding more foam behind the two M's and gluing those down around the O. So I have my mom sentiment adhered to my card background. And now I just need to add Luvia. It'll be nice and sturdy because I have those extra layers of cardstock, and I'm going to add some glue where it will overlap the elephant image as well as the mom sentiment. So just adding glue on the bottom part of that sentiment and then on the top of the few letters that do overlap my elephant images, and then glue that right on down to the card front. So now that it's all done, I do want to add a little bit of pops of color, but I stop myself and remember that I need to glue it to my card base. Scrapbook.com does sell some card bases all ready to go for you, and I'm just adding some adhesive to the front of my card base. I really love top folding A2 size cards. I think they sit really nicely on mantles and bookshelves for your card receiver. So glued that down to my card base, and now I can add my pops of color, which is in Lemon Chiffon Pearl. And I'm adding, I think, 7 different little pops around the flowers and images and sentiment on my card. Now I like to tap them so that way they kind of dome out and look a little bit more like enamel dots rather than a Hershey kiss. And that will finish off my Love Ya Mom card using Scrapbook.com exclusive products as well as Lawn Fawn. I hope you enjoyed this card tutorial and that you mix your products together and come up with really fun and creative cards just like this Mother's Day floral card yourself. Thanks again to Scrapbook.com for having me, and I hope you have a wonderful day.